So, from baseball to breakfast and bakery, what do you think?
I think it's great. So many of you might not know Bimbo Bakeries as a parent company, but Thomas's is the main brand that I represent. So hence the breakfast comments.
I didn't say baseball to bagels, at least, so that was okay.
Yeah.
Well, Nicole, give us a little bit of your background, what you do, and as general manager of breakfast, what does that mean?
Yeah, so general manager of breakfast is really overseeing all aspects of making sure our bagels and English muffins and swirl bread are toasted proper or baked properly at our bakeries, that they're at the highest quality standards, so all of you enjoy the products. Through how do we make sure it's going through our supply chain in the most efficient and effective way. It's making sure it's showing up on our grocery shelf properly. And then, that's just on the operations side. On the other side, it's the more fun marketing side, I'd say, of it, of making sure we're building those long-term consumer demand, making sure that our advertising is resonating with consumers emotionally, but also looking at the full funnel and making sure we're driving sales at the last mile with our consumers, either in store or at the digital shelf.
One of the things that I thought was fascinating when Joe was talking about it, I think in marketing we always think about what we're doing, and we sometimes forget we're in a competitive space. We are on a playing field, and we're having to really fight back and forth. When you look at some of the tools that you have today, one of the big tools people talk about is retail media. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think retail media becomes incredibly important because it's our way to also help work with our customers. At the end of the day, our products don't sell if we don't have the best relationships with our retailers. And that's one way we can do that and get in front of and making sure we're jumping in front of our competition. So, retail, the CPG space is really interesting these days. You have the big brands who've been here for a long time. That's us. In bakery, we have 60-70% share of our categories. But there are a lot of challenger brands out there today. There are a lot of these startups. There are companies that are in this neighborhood, like a Simple Mills. So you have to always be watching and understanding what those competitors are doing. And so the retailer data, the Circana data, the retail media data, if you're not paying attention to those metrics and understanding who's moving and who isn't, it becomes really hard. You also have the dynamic today of private label is growing in every single category, right? Our consumers are strapped for money. They're going to the cheaper place to buy it, and those products are at a good quality today too.
Now, a lot of digital marketers think of CPG as lagging, like we don't have much data. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I actually disagree with that. If you look at the Circanas of the world, Zeta has a lot of the data. If you understand who's purchasing different products, it can give you a lot of intelligence. If you look at what those people are also buying in their shopping basket, that can give you a lot of data. You can look at all that data cut on demographics. You can look at it geographically. There was a beverage company a while ago who talked a lot about their very hyper-local data strategies in terms of where they wanted to make sure if their product was out of stock in a place, they didn't put ads out there. So all that data is available today. It's just about how do you mine that data, how do you use it intelligently, and how do you make sure your actions are agile to use it.
So you need that game playbook that Joe was talking about. Now, one of the big things here is a lot of folks are saying CPGs should build first-party data. That's expensive. Does it pay out?
Yeah, so in a different role that I've had, that was actually my job. I was building out our first data platform, and for those brands, it made sense for a number of reasons. I actually came to Bimbo Bakeries in a previous role before I was in breakfast and said, I don't think building out a first-party database is actually the most economic thing for us to do. It does cost a lot of money to collect the records and harvest the records and make sure you're refreshing them. And it's not just that one record you collect. So let's say you collect a record and you have an email address. You know nothing about that person. So you have to add different attributes onto it. You then have to store the data. There's a lot of different pieces. And so in certain industries, it makes a ton of sense. I think it's live or die by that data. In CPG, as I was saying before, there's second-party data sets, there's third-party data sets that can really give you a lot of value. So we've actually gone against collecting first-party data today. I think it's paid out for us. The other thing that's interesting is depending on your brand or the size of your brand or the different categories, even in CPG, there's difference. So we have found, for example, that on our larger brands, we actually do not get a payout when we put extra data layers on it. But for some of our more niche brands, we absolutely get the payout when we put the extra layers of data on. So a lot of times the extra layer data might be at least $1. If you're not getting over $1 return, it's not worth doing it.
I think you're on a great point there, and a lot of people forget that sometimes renting data is what you need to do. A lot of folks also think about precision at scale, but what you're saying is precision at payout. Can you say a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think you have to really understand what is the lifetime value when you use this. So if you are able to acquire a consumer and keep them continuously buying or increasing their buying rate, that extra fee pays out over time, right? Because they're bringing back more revenue to you. If you pay a lot of money to acquire someone one time and they never come back, it's kind of a sunk cost. So you have to start to really do the math on it and understand what's working for you and what isn't working for you based on some of your strategies.
That's a good lead into the next question. Attribution across the funnel. One of the things I think we find today, people talk about upper funnel and lower funnel and sort of forget it is a funnel. They are connected. Do you want to talk about that? In CPG, brand matters.
Yeah, I think it really does, and it's really interesting depending on different, I'd say, org structures at organizations. It's a really hot topic right now. There are a number of organizations where you have, let's say, shopper marketing that sits over in one corner of an organization, and you'll have media or brand that sits in one, and sometimes e-com's in a different place, and it can just be all over the place. And in those situations, right or wrong, you have different teams who are invested in their part of the funnel. And so you sometimes have the internal wars, right? You've all experienced it, I'm sure. And that was the situation when I got to Bimbo, actually. There were about 5 different groups who were buying retail media at different points in time, and then a separate group that was buying brand media. And so one of the things we've been able to do over time is to actually better integrate those teams. And so we've done it over a series of restructures. I think we're actually at our best place right now after a recent restructure, where now we have one team who's responsible for executing and buying all retail and brand media. You then have still a couple different people from a strategic standpoint, but it is much more collaborative. It's much more aligned to the brand strategies. And the reason why that matters is you can actually look at the attribution as that's talking about through one set of reporting. When I first started, our shopper marketing team, for example, would say, hey, I have these like ROIs and they're $50. It'd be like, there's no way you have a $50 ROI. Your bread costs like $4. Like, this isn't making sense. But they also would look at it as if a consumer walked into a store and maybe saw their shopper marketing execution, they got full attribution for the entire decision making. And we all know that that's not true, right? The marketing works because of a series of exposures that someone has to brand for most of the time. So what we're able to do now is we have integrated reporting that looks like where in the funnel are we winning, where in the funnel are we not winning, and then we're having active conversations on how do we adjust our strategies. There might be a brand where our awareness is fantastic, right? We have these big old brands, but consideration isn't strong. Well, if consideration isn't strong, then what are the channels and tactics we need to look at? We could have brands where the consideration is strong, but we're just not the favorite brand, so they're buying it every once in a while, not as often. Then you need the lower funnel tactics. But if you don't work as a consolidated, integrated team and looking at it holistically, I think you miss a lot of opportunity to actually move the consumer through the funnel.
Again, it's that playing field.
Yeah.
When you think about that, who should own that? Should it be marketing, consumer insights? How do you see who should own that data strategy?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think it goes back to just different roles and functions and org structures again. I think at the end of the day, the brand does need to own the overarching piece of it because they are the keepers of the brand and they need to set the overall strategy. We're fortunate. We have a lot of really great support functions within the team. I used to run our Marketing Center of Excellence that had insights, it had media, it had analytics. And they're really embedded in our brand teams, and so they can each add their own element of expertise into the mix, because I think there's not just one owner. It's actually the collection of the different thought and the insights that come together. I think the brand then does make the decision as the owner and makes sure that the right actions are being taken and is held accountable to those decisions. But it is a collection of different people on that data strategy.
Makes sense. Again, it's a team sport. When you think about it, one thing we didn't touch on, the CFO. Do they understand marketing measurement? And are we sharing the right things with the CFO so they understand what this means?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest topics out there, right? You see tons of articles all the time on the CMO-CFO relationship and how they need to be really strong. There's a lot of good coaching out there too that I would highly recommend for anyone in marketing that doesn't maybe have that relationship on how do you speak in a language that the CFO is going to understand. And so we're in a place right now, our current CFO is a believer and supporter in marketing. We are having good conversations that look at when our media is live, this is the payback we're getting. When our media gets cut, this is the long-term implication of those decisions. We have a pretty sophisticated marketing mix modeling setup, so we're able to look at revenue ROIs, we're able to look at profit ROIs, we're able to look at unit contribution when we make different decisions. We have scenario planners. And so all that helps us go into financial conversations with an idea of this is actually the business impact we have when we put money against different tactics. So it's not just hey, I know my awareness went up, and they're like, great, what does that really mean? So I do think being able to speak in a language that impacts the business in short and long term makes a huge difference. And just also sometimes asking them on the side, what do you or not understand? How can I help you? Happy to have a private coaching conversation, right? Marketing today has gotten very sophisticated, especially on the digital side. And so your average CFO maybe never was trained on what attribution means, wasn't trained on the dynamics of what it means to manage the digital shelf. And does that mean it's really a trade effort or is it a marketing effort? There's just a lot of new topics, and as marketers, we use a lot of jargon. It gets really confusing. One of the rules I learned a very long time ago from a CMO that I worked with was never use jargon when you're trying to talk to people, especially in the C-suite, and make it as simple and easy as possible. And I consistently try and always teach that to my teams because it makes a huge difference. If you're not speaking the same language, there's a lot of misinterpretation that might get you not to the place you want to be at.
I think that idea of partnering is really important, and be willing to teach, meet them where they're at, and help them understand what's going on. One thing you touched on there was about marketing mix modeling. Now, I'm starting to see some houses out there that are actually kind of in the media game, grading their own work. What's your thought?
Yes, I'm actually really against media companies grading their own information. I truly think you need an outside third party. It's the same thing on auditing, right? It's this idea of trust but verify. If someone at a media company has a really clean process and clean data and clean execution on what they're doing, they should have no concern or issue with a third party looking at the data. When they start to put up the walls, I think it's a little bit of a red flag. The other thing when you have a third party is you can look at it more holistically. So it's great if partner A says that they did one thing, but then you aren't learning what the interaction is between the different platforms. So again, if you want to look at the full funnel, if you want to look at the holistic solution, you need the whole picture, and you're only going to get that from a third party.
And that makes perfect sense because they're not invested in the next impression that you're selling or that you're buying. Joe touched on automation versus human judgment. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a really good topic, and it's my own personal reason why I think robots aren't going to fully take over the world right now. At the end of the day, the data is extremely important. The data should set up objective conversations to have, right? We've all been in rooms where people are they're making emotional decisions on things, and you need to have an objective conversation. The data gets you there. At the same time, there are going to be spaces like creative development, right? He talked about creative a little bit. You are a human being, and there are times where you just need to have a human emotional connection to the creative. Sometimes you're going to be able to explain it, sometimes you're not, right? And you can still go out and test it and run all the different data, but some of it is, I think, art and science still, because marketing works when you have that human connection and you can tug on someone's heartstrings.
So it's still art and science. Automation's going to do a lot, but at the end of the day, we still have to be able to judge and overrule.
I think so, but I think also automation helps you potentially build out the analytics for you. So again, it helps set up the data that you need to be looking at. So much of our time sometimes is spent on cleaning the data, making sure the data is accurate, sometimes making sure everyone's using the same data set so we don't have multiple sets of truth that aren't aligning with each other. So automation helps to do all those things, but as the human, you still do need to understand the data.
Absolutely.
You need to question the data. You need to build the hypotheses. I've been trying to start this hashtag on our internal chatter site of the why behind the what, because a lot of times I'm seeing data reports that have no language next to it. And it's like it's numbers for numbers' sake. I think they were just talking about that. But there's no intelligence behind it. And I think as a human, we need to really pressure test it and sometimes get curious behind it.
So a little bit of a time machine question. If you look forward 2, 3, 5 years, what's going to make marketing leaders be ahead of everyone else? What do you think will make the difference?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's about if we could all actually figure out what are leading indicators for our business and how to analyze and follow those leading indicators, I think it would make a huge difference. I know from a media perspective, and different companies are in different places, it's really hard to figure out what is the KPI I'm actually supposed to be optimizing against. Does it mean that my business is going to be more successful if I get a higher click-through rate or if I get more video views? Some people have figured it out a little bit more, others haven't. There was a company I worked at in the past, it was a retail company, and they knew if their foot traffic was healthy, that their business would be healthier, right? So I think just identifying those pieces, and once you do, there's so much data and analytics that can get you there. So I do see predictive as more of the future.
So I'm hearing an interesting theme there. Go back to simplicity.
Yeah.
Through a lot of complex things.
Yeah.
Excellent. Nicole, thank you very much.
Thank you.